G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. We'll have all the show notes and any resources mentioned in the cast on our website. One of the first craft distilleries of commercial scale in Australia, founded in 1996, sold in 1999, went into liquidation in 2003, then Patrick and a few investors salvaged the business. Closing the cellar door in Central Hobart and moving the distillery 20 minutes out of town into an industrial park, they invested heavily in production with a big focus on laying down quality spirit and then marketing. In 2014, won Best Single Malt Whiskey in the world, the first distillery to do so outside whisky's traditional homes of Scotland, Ireland and Japan. A year later, they opened a cellar door, and a year after that the business was sold again to the current owners, and Patrick left the business in late 2019. Grew from a handful of FTE to 9, down to just 2 after liquidation, and now 23. He believes the hardest thing in growing a small business is keeping an eye on cash flow. Cash is king. Advice Patrick would give himself on day one is back yourself, have a plan, stick to the plan. You'll go through times where you hate yourself for doing what you're doing, but it'll all work out. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Patrick Maguire from Sullivans Cove Distillery here in sunny Hobart, Tasmania. Thanks for your time today, Patrick.
You're very welcome.
Maybe tell the audience a little bit how we know each other. Do you remember how we first met?
From what I remember, I think it might have been in at the Lark Distillery.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then we spent a bit of time together on the Tasmanian Whisky Producers Association committee. So that's where I got to know you a lot better, and obviously around the traps on various whisky events and stalls around Australia over the years.
We did plenty of those.
Yes, we did. Hard work.
Yeah, interesting times.
Yes. And, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting for the audience because whiskey, particularly New World whiskey's got such a great reputation now, but you started at Sullivans many, many years before that really took off. So maybe tell the audience a bit about the business, Sullivans Cove Distillery, a bit of the background, when it started, you know, how it makes money.
Well, it started back in probably more like 1997, I think is when they first got going, or maybe even 1996. And that was set up by a guy, Robert Hoskin, who happened to have the gasworks site, which is 100 metres from where we're sitting now.
Yeah, we're just sitting down at Hobart Brewing Company having a cold beer at the moment. Yeah, round the corner.
Yeah, but Rob set up the distillery because that was the very early stages of having distilleries operating again in Tasmania and perhaps even in Australia in a small way.
That was only like 4 years after Bill and Lynn had started Lark Distillery, yeah.
So it was a very new thing, but he got the gasworks site and developed that in various ways, and one of those ways was to set up this distillery. So I take my hat off to Rob because if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today, probably to a large extent, as far as Sullivans Cove goes anyway. But he got it going, and from what I understand, he certainly wasn't a distiller, but he had the coin, I guess, to get the thing up and going. So he produced, I can't remember now, what was it, 160 odd barrels of whiskey at that time. So what, 160 in late 90s? That's a lot of whiskey for a small industry here in Australia, yeah. Well, nothing had happened like that yet. I mean, in those days you had Bundaberg rum, Inner Circle, a few others around, but they were the majors of the time, and they were they are quite big distilleries.
Yes.
So even Sullivans Cove in those days was very, very small.
Yeah.
Very much a boutique operation. But he sold that business to a couple of other people. They were from Canberra, and they got in and employed Bill Lark to come in and manage the property for them. He was one of the few around at the time that had enough nous or enough experience at that very early stage to be able to do that.
I remember Bill telling me once that he and Lynn effectively were running the distillery 24 hours. He'd do a 12-hour shift, clock off, and Lynn would come on and do the next 12 hours. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, they work like mad.
They do.
Days.
Yeah.
But I think it was always Rob's idea to sell it on eventually. That's the sort of thing that he did.
Yeah.
But the new guys came on board, wanted to get it going and wanted to ramp it up.
What year was that?
That was in 1999.
Right.
That's when I came along. I mean, prior to that, just to put it into some sort of context, Bill and myself and Lynn were old mates. We'd been in business together for years. We were old ski club members. They drank far too many Reds over too many years.
And that's when you decided to run a pub up one of the mountains here?
Yeah,
Ben
that's
Lomond?
right.
Together? Yeah.
Back in those days, we had our best ideas after far too many beers and too many bottles of Red.
Yep.
And one of those ideas that came out of that was to build a pub up at Penlone.
Yep.
And we were all ski club members, and back when I was 21 or something like that, we got together and built this ski club up there, and we were all young and single in those days, and the parties could go all weekend. It was quite good. And then one by one, people started getting married and having kids, and telling us to party down.
Settle down, yeah.
So we thought, well, that's no good.
Yep.
You can't have this sort of thing going up on a ski mountain. So we came up with the idea of building a pub, and there were 4 of us got together with that to build that, and one of those people, well, Bill and Lynn were part of that group.
Yep.
So 4 family groups got together to do it. So we literally put the nail bag on and got in there with the builders and built the thing every weekend, all our holidays. We were doing other normal jobs prior to that, so during that. So we got that going, and that business itself developed over the years, and we kept on adding to it, and eventually we got to the point where we realised, this is getting a bit crazy, and we either have to invest in this more full time or get out and get back to our normal life. So anyway, in that time, I remember another red wine night up at the ski club. Bill mooted this idea of setting up a distillery. His story was, we've got all the ingredients here in Tasmania, the right climate and everything to make whiskey. Why don't we do it? And I can remember saying to Bill at the time, mate, you've had some interesting ideas in your time, but I don't think that's a very good one. It's got to a perfectly good job.
Right.
Why would you want to?
So you tried to dissuade Bill Lark, the godfather of Australian whiskey, who's in the Whiskey Hall of Fame along with yourself in London, to not get into whiskey, basically?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, right.
It just seemed like an idea that was a million miles away from where we were in Tasmania at the time, but I'm glad he didn't listen.
Yes, yeah. I've done that plenty of times. Given advice I've been totally wrong on,
It's interesting, him and Lynn just sort of got on with it and did it. And I can remember going down to their place in the very early days. They had a little, I forget what it was, a little 5-litre still it might have been, or 10-litre still. We bought it at a op shop somewhere, and once or twice I'd go down to his place and they'd set that little still up on the kitchen sink and knock out a bit of spirit. And then he had a little tiny 2-litre barrel, and we'd put the spirit in that and say, well, we'll go and mature that and see how it pans out.
What, lasted about a week?
Well, not even that. I mean, we'd go and have a barbie and a couple of sausages and a couple of beers. And
go and grab the 2-litre.
It's been an hour now. So I actually ended up working for them a couple of years prior to 1999. So it would have been, I don't know, 96, 97, 98, something like that. I'd work the mountain up at the pub in the winter. But in the summer I'd come down and work for them at the distillery. So that was mainly on the selling of their liqueurs and spirits that they made at the time. And through that I got to know a little bit about distilling. So when Bill got the job of managing Tas Distillery, he asked me along because at least I knew something about it, something about the process. And we were old mates and we were business partners anyway. So it kind of worked. And so that's when I got into distilling full time. I used to work in a pathology lab for years prior to that. So I got a science background and spent the days when I wasn't up at the pub looking down a microscope. So this was a big departure from that, and one that I was quite keen to get into, just as a bit of a departure from doing that sort of thing.
And what year was that then that you would have started? Tas Distillery was the name of it?
Tasmania Distillery, and that was in 1999.
Right.
So we cranked out a lot of new make spirit in that time. The new owners backed it quite a lot. So that was very good. And they basically gave us free rein to do whatever we thought was necessary. And so Bill set about trying to make sure that we did everything we possibly could to make a good spirit at the time. But in those days too, we were learning on the job. And this is before the internet is what it is today. And so the old school way of doing it was to find books. And it was fairly limited here. There was a little bit on the internet that we liked, but there were times where we used to bring people in Scotland.
That's bolshy.
They were really very good, and Bill will tell you a few stories about that. I did the same in my career with it. Spent some time in Scotland in one particular distillery, Isle of Arran. I met Gordon Mitchell here in Tasmania. He came here. I think Hellier's Row brought him out.
Right.
And he came to visit us and invited me over to his distillery on the Isle of Arran. And I spent some time with him, and they were really gracious. They basically opened the place up. I was able to work there for a short amount of time, and they just look, anything you want to know.
Yeah, it's great.
It's here for you to see, and apart from their books, obviously, that's not what I went there to learn about. I went there to learn about how to run a still, and they were really very good. All aspects of it: barreling, maturation, distilling, the whole box and die. So the Scots in the early days, and still are, very, very generous with the time.
Yeah, Bill says that. Yeah.
So we did a lot of that, or some of that back then, and it was basically head down, bum up, and make as much as we can. So we didn't really know whether what we were making back then would be any good, but we tried to do it the best that we could at the time, and what we thought smelt good, tasted good, that sort of stuff before we put it in the barrel.
Because you're not going to know, or in Sullivan's case, it was about minimum 10-year maturation, was that right?
Well, it is, yeah. That's the way it's panned out.
Yeah, so for those in the audience who don't understand the whiskey industry, it's a new make is what comes off the still. It's clear spirit, looks like vodka, and it gets its colour and a lot of its character and flavour from sitting in a cask for 2, 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it may be. So you're not really going to know until, that it's matured.
Well, that's true, but I mean, if you think you've got a good new make right from the start and you think you've got a good barrel, hopefully it'll work out pretty good in the end.
Yeah, of course. So in the timeline then, Bill and Lynn left after a few years, is that right?
Bill was there for about 18 months and got the thing up and running. And then I took over. He left and I got handed the job. So that was an interesting time. It was very, very early in the modern era of distilling whiskey in Tasmania or in this country.
Yes.
So at the time, unfortunately, I think they were a little bit ahead of their time, and it just didn't work. So eventually that all fell over and that business was liquidated. So
that was Tasmanian Distillery. In what year would that have been?
2003. The liquidators rang one morning to inform me that they'd taken over, and I thought, okay, well, off I go.
Yep.
They said, no, we want you to stay there and manage it for us until we can find somebody to come on board. And that's when I first got involved financially. So we had a few people look at it. But I think in those days, still far too young. They could see our turnover as far as bottle sales goes was not very good.
Quite low for that time.
So there weren't many serious takers, but a group of people came along, 4 of them, and were very keen to take it on. But they would only take it on if I became a part of the business. And I saw it as an opportunity at the time to actually get involved as a distiller, as a part owner, and as a director. So what drove me there was, it's all started many, many years beforehand, probably back in the 70s when I got my first job. And I was basically an office boy for a lawyer's in the city here. And my first boss said to me, if you ever want to do any good, you've got to leave Tasmania. And as a young 16-year-old or whatever I was at the time, never been anywhere else in my life but Tasmania, I was amazed. I had no idea of the world. I had no idea of the rest of Australia in those days. And I was quite proud of our little state, and I thought, what a strange thing to say. So from then on, I thought, if ever I can find a product
it's going to keep you here.
I could create here in Tasmania and sell to the world, I'd really like to be a part of it.
Wow, okay.
Well, that was one of the drivers, and I spent many years looking for that particular thing. Didn't really find it until this came along, even though I said to Bill, don't do it.
It's a very circuitous path that's, brought to where you are now. That's amazing.
But when this opportunity came along, I thought, well, look, even though things weren't flying along in those days, or, to get anybody interested in buying Tasmanian whiskey at the time was an uphill battle. It was very much a tourist operation and not a lot of people were interested. So it was quite a hard thing to do, to sell anything at all. But nevertheless, I thought, well, this given time could be that product that would end up taking beyond Tasmania and possibly to the rest of Australia and possibly beyond. So I thought, well, here's a chance. So anyway, we struck a price with the liquidators. We ended up buying the plant and stock. We didn't actually buy the business. So we set up a new company, bought the plant and stock, and away we went again. But this time we had people who were on board with the idea that it wasn't going to be an easy job. This was going to take a few years before we really got off the ground. We're going to have to put a bit of work into marketing. And we had to try and figure out where is our market, who is our market, and all that. So that's where I think the first company might have gone a little bit wrong. I don't think they understood their market quite as well as they could have. And they were trying to sell a whiskey that was far too young and to a tourist market that wasn't that invested in it. So anyway, they had a crack and got us where we are, the first steps of where we are. So when we got stuck into it, we moved from the gasworks location, which is in Sullivans Cove, and that's where the name is.
Almost Central Hobart, in the city.
And we found a beautiful little example of a concrete slab construction warehouse with barbed wire, cyclone fencing around it, and moved there and set up again. And
that's out of Cambridge, where it is now,
which is about 15-20 minutes drive out of the city, which is almost rural, or pretty much rural. But it was a light, not industrial area. The original site was very difficult as far as production goes.
Yeah.
It wasn't set up for production. Even though the distillery, all the still and equipment was there, it was a nightmare as far as production went. And even as tourism went, it was a difficult site.
Literally on an island in the middle of, start of two major arterials in the middle of Hobart. Yeah, so it's not a great location for either.
Great exposure.
Yeah.
Anybody coming into the Hobart goes into Hobart
we'll
from
see
the
it.
airport, for instance.
Yep.
Goes past that.
Yep.
So it stood out. But if you didn't know how to get in there, you went past it, you could never get back.
No,
if
that's
you were
right.
a tourist.
Yeah.
So it was quite difficult. But the worst thing for us as distillers was it was a nightmare as far as production goes. We had a tiny little room to do all our bottling in.
Yeah.
The distillery equipment itself was down in the pit, and we had to climb up and down a steel ladder every time we went.
Wow.
It was just not a practical place.
Yeah.
So we thought we need to find somewhere else to do this a lot better. So we moved out to quite a standard little warehouse and set it up all in there.
What year was that?
We moved into there about, it would have been 2004. Now, the idea then wasn't so much for sales, although we did want to achieve a certain level of sales in order to get us through. But we knew it was going to take a year, so our business plan was to be prepared to fund this over a few years. Till we hoped we could generate some sort of a market in that time. And by then, the whiskey that we produced, 3 or 4 years earlier, would have had a bit more age on it and would have been a bit more presentable by then. But we were prepared to take the hit. A couple of years. As far as distilling went, it was much, much easier. And we went from a workforce of, I think we had 12 people back in the days at the gasworks site. Most of those were in retail. There were 4 of us distillers working around the clock. We used to work 24/7 in those days.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So it would have been 12 full-time equivalents?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Wow.
Oh, maybe not full-time, but probably something like 9 or 10 full-time.
And just going back to that, in 96 when it first started, how many would there have been full-time?
Look, that's a good question. I wasn't there in those days, but there would have been a few in the retail area. And, well, it would have only been Bill and Lynn in the production area.
So maybe 4 or 5 all up, including
maybe
retail.
Like that.
Okay,
But anyway, when we moved down there, we ended up with just 2 of us, myself and one other guy, Paul Monks. And for a few years there, it was just us. But we were mostly production. So we were just running the still and doing what bottling had to be done.
Because you didn't have a retail outlet until, was it 2016 out there?
Oh, no, earlier than that. Oh, no, I guess as a retail outlet goes, it probably would have been, maybe 2015.
Right, yes.
Possibly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So 9 years after you moved out there, pretty much.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, 11 years.
We did sell from the original site. I mean, we were in one small warehouse then. We did sell from there.
Yep.
But we had no actual dedicated shop space or anything like that. So it was just in the warehouse. And back then, we would be lucky to get 1 or 2 visitors a week.
Right.
So it was pretty easy, and they'd just rock up, knock on the door, and say, come in, would you like a glass of whiskey? And take them around the place, which took all of 10 minutes, and just tell them what they wanted to know. So it was very easy going in those days. And if we were lucky, they'd buy a bottle, and off they'd go.
That's pretty phenomenal, though. You went from effectively 9 FTE here at Gasworks, moved out to Cambridge, and you went down to just the 2 of you, you and Paul. Because obviously a lot of the 9 FTE in town here was with the retail staff.
That's right. The majority of it was retail.
Yep.
So after a couple of years, we rolled along, and then a couple of partners in the business realised that this was going to take a bit longer, so they sort of bowed out at the time. And that was good only from the point of view that if you haven't got partners invested in what we're trying to do, they're better off not there.
Yes.
And they recognised that and decided to go, so that was good. So that left 3 of us, and the remaining 2 were there to see it out.
Yeah.
They wanted to create something good. They wanted to really get going with it, and they were prepared to put in more years if it was needed.
Yeah, great. Sounds like good partners to have.
There's no doubt about that, and they were very, very patient.
Yeah.
So they didn't get anything out of the business right till the end. So very, very patient with us there. But eventually we got, after probably 3-4 years, we got to the point where we were selling enough to go our own way. The business was
cash flow positive.
Was cash flow positive. But having said that, there were some years we produced no barrels. Other years we might have produced 40 barrels, some years 100 barrels, and we just went like that. It purely depended on cash flow. So back in those days, I basically did pretty much all of that myself. And so we were distilling, we were marketing, we were bottling, we were doing everything that had to be done. We were, I was flying off to all sorts of places, to all the different wine and spirit shows.
Whiskey Lives around the world.
Lives, all that sort of stuff. So I was away quite a lot. By that stage, we probably had a couple more people on board. In the early days, Paul looked after the distillery while I was away a lot by himself. Then we got another guy on Jacko, who's a cousin. He came on board at that early stage, and between the three of us, we did a fair bit in those days. But it was really important to try and find markets for what we're doing. And back then, I thought Asia would be our market, because Australia was hopeless. Australia didn't want to know.
The number of people I've had to educate at whiskey events that what Scotch is, for the audience, Scotch can only be called Scotch if it's made in Scotland, like champagne can only be called champagne if it's made in that region of France. But then I was like a robot at shows all the time, just educating Australians at these whiskey shows. Then when they'd say, I didn't realise we made whiskey in Australia, let alone Tasmania. I didn't realise we made Scotch in Australia, let alone Tasmania. But
that's the thing with the single malt whiskey in particular. All things, everybody uses the term Scotch. It's just a natural thing that rolls off the tongue. So we've had to spend a lot of time trying to gently educate people as to what Scotch is and the fact that we're not Scotch. That's been an interesting process and a byproduct of what we're doing. But still, people insist on calling it Scotch. We're still trying to beat them over the head with that. So look, it was a fascinating time. In that time, we had a lot of support from the state government, the Tasmanian government, and so I spent a fair bit of time with them, and they gave me grants to go and visit places around the world to try and find these markets. I originally thought Asia would be our natural market because the Asians do love their whiskey. But being a novice to this, I thought I'd better go and have a look around Asia. So I put this program together with the government department and went and visited quite a number of Asian countries and cities. And that was the time our third rendition of packaging. First two were not the best.
It's very common though in founders actually doing their own packaging and branding and marketing early on when you're trying to conserve capital.
That's right. We didn't have the money to pay people to do it. And eventually we decided, look, this isn't working. Well, it was actually after this trip that I went round, and the common comments I got from the Asian importers, distributors and retailers was, look, we do like what you've got in the bottle. That's really nice.
Just the packaging looks shit.
Packaging shit. And, and come back when you're 12 years old.
Right, the business,
Yeah, well, when the spirit was 12 years old. Because it was probably 6 years old maybe at the time.
Because all Scotches, particularly at that time, you probably couldn't find a Scotch under 12 years old then.
Well, 8 was fairly common, but 12, yes. So that was what everybody had in their mind. If you wanted to have a good...
Age equals quality, that's right. Right. And which is not true, but
well, it's true to a point, but not entirely true at all. I came back with my tail between my legs, and I don't think I got a single sale out of that. And thought, well, what do we got to do here? First of all, we've got to have good packaging. So that's when we investigated, okay, what does it cost to get somebody to design good packaging? So we had a look at who's designing good wine labels. And so we found some wine labels that we really liked and found out who was behind the design of those. And we approached those companies with a brief to say, okay, we would like good packaging for our whiskey. And so we ended up going with a company in Western Australia. And at the time, the price frightened me. This was a lot of money at the time. But we ended up doing it. It took us a while, probably 6 months. And eventually we came up with what is pretty much the same as what we've got today. The brand has today. There have been some variations along the way, but we haven't strayed very far from the original design. And that's put us in good stead. And what I wanted at the time was something that was simple, something that was a good-looking bottle, and something that said whiskey. And something that said not Scotch whiskey. So that to me was quite important. I thought we have a point of differentiation, and that is that we are creating a spirit here in Australia. We're not creating a Scotch. And I wanted to say we're whiskey, but I wanted to say we're not Scotch. How you did that was something that we tried and failed at before.
It's an amazing art or expertise of branding and marketing. It's so crucial, so important. One distillery I know of, similar story to yourself, I think their brand setup was 50 grand. And I remember talking with the founder, he was gobsmacked. I'm not paying that much money, and fought it all the way, ended up paying it, and then 4 or 5 years later selling out for quite a healthy sum, 1 to 2 million I think it was. So it was a great investment. A lot of people think marketing is an expense, but it's actually an investment. If you get the right people on to get the brand and your packaging right, it can pay huge dividends.
It's a strange thing. To me, marketing is just as important as the product you're producing, whatever it is, or whatever service you're selling. If you can't market product or the service you're selling, you might as well not bother. So each equally important, and I view them as separate parts of the business, two separate businesses in a lot of ways. Because quite often the marketing people don't necessarily see eye to eye with the production people.
No, that's very common.
But each side of it has got to understand where each other is coming from. For a long time, the way I used to do it was anybody that came into the business would spend some time on the sales side of it. and then move into production side of it,
Yep.
or the other way around, because in those days our workforce was very small, so it was very easy to do that in a way, but it did a couple of things. It made both sides of the fence aware of what the other side was doing. Also, when somebody went on leave or had time off, whatever reason,
You cover them.
they could fill in. So when you've only got a few people, that's quite important. But it taught them about sales, it taught them a bit about marketing, it taught them a lot about production and the importance of the whole mix.
And so what year was that branding or packaging change, if you remember?
That would have been 2006, 2007.
Okay, and then we'll get to the bit in a minute where, because you finished up at Sullivans recently, we'll get to that in a moment. So just going along the timeline, 2006, the next 14 years?
Well, in that time, we did get our packaging right.
Yep.
We went from going to various shows, either overseas or here in Australia, with people saying, look, we love your whiskey, but your packaging shit. So I felt we'd found the right packaging this time.
I pretty much said the same thing to Cam Syme at Limeburners when Bill and I were over there 6 years ago. Great whiskey, Cam, but your packaging is absolutely woefully shit. I mean, it was in those hard plastic, clear plastic things that soft toys come in. The bottles were in that. And I said, mate, you've got to at least put it in a cardboard box. This just looks so shoddy. You make such great spirit, but yeah, sorry, keep going.
You learn a lot from your mistakes.
You do, yeah. But a year or so later, I saw the packaging had changed. So the repackaging was another big milestone. What else after that? 2006?
Well, I guess our direction was, not our marketing plan, but our plan was, there's a few things we needed to do. One is pull back, forget about sales for the moment, concentrate on making bloody good spirit.
Yep, and more of it.
And more of it.
Yep.
Get the packaging right and take the time to allow the spirit to mature. Let the barrels tell us when they're ready, not, okay, it's 6 years old, it's bottle it, sort of thing. The barrels do actually tell us when they're ready to go. But we also needed to somehow to get some credibility for the whiskey. And I can sit here today and tell you, look, you've got to drink Sullivans Cove because it's the best. And you're going to think, well, you're full of shit. You're not going to take any notice of me because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You might taste that and think, yeah, that is the best whiskey in the world. Or you might taste it and think, well, no, I've had a lot better than that.
Yep.
Or you might not like it at all. So you can't tell anybody what they should think about these things. You can never tell your market a lie. You can't treat them like idiots.
Yep.
And I think there's a bit of that goes on this planet. I've always taken the view that you just put it in front of them and you let them make up their own minds.
That's good.
And it's the only way to do it, and particularly when it comes to whiskey.
Yep.
But somehow we had to find credibility for the spirit that we were producing without me trying to stand there and tell people that it's nice, you should try it. So somehow or another, Jim Murray got hold of a bottle of our whiskey back in probably 2007, something like that.
He started the very famous Whiskey Bible, I think only in the late 90s or early 2000s. Yeah, when I met him at Lashley Lark Bar and had a dram with him, I asked him, how many whiskies a year, new whiskies, are you entering into the book, or make it into the book? And I think he said he was sampling something like 1,200 drams a year, 1,200 different samples a year. I mean, that's one hell of a job.
Well, now I think it's 3,000 or 4,000.
Wow, jeez.
Different samples a year. How he does that, I don't know.
Yeah,
Good luck.
very slowly.
We were very lucky then. He picked us up. Prior to that, in his earlier publications of the Whiskey Bible, back in the very early days when he was sent samples of Sullivans Cove, it didn't rate very well at all. It was too young, so it got very poor ratings. So the brand didn't have a good name as a result of that. And once we started putting spirit in bottles that we thought was good, Jim Murray started getting some of that, and we started getting right up there. So we were in the 80s and 90s.
Wow, that's really good. Out of 100, that's amazing.
Out of 100, yeah.
What's liquid gold? 92?
96.
90, is it 90?
No, 95.
95 or above is liquid gold, yeah.
And we, over the years, got 3 of those in those early days too. And that really gave us something to talk about.
Yep.
So we could then say, we've got 3 liquid gold awards.
Yeah, adds a lot of credibility, yeah.
So that was a huge boost for us.
Right.
And that's when things started looking a little bit better. So I spent a fair bit of time heading off to Europe, and we ended up with distributors in France, Belgium.
The Maison in France?
The Maison Whiskey. And that was very good. So we used to go to Whiskey Lives there.
Yep.
I used to go to the Pot Still Festival in Holland, which was the week later. And what I discovered there was that the Europeans have been drinking single malt or whiskey for many years, and we really didn't have much trouble getting people to buy our whiskies over there.
Because it was a great product.
Yeah. Well, as it turned out, back in those days, myself and Bill Lark used to go off, take ourselves off to Europe, and we'd go to Whiskey Live and do these things. And I remember in the very, very first time we went there, we had our little stand set up in the corner, and they do a very big show.
Yeah.
Well, they're very big.
They are massive, yeah.
And
Thierry puts on a very good show.
He does a brilliant job. But there we were, these two little Tasmanians standing there behind our stand with a little Aussie flag and a couple of stuffed kangaroos. And we just couldn't get people to come to our stand. There'd be a sort of an arc around our stand. There was a glass wall. And we were saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to get people to come and try our whiskey? So we ended up going out and trying to communicate with these non-English speakers. They pretended to be, I think. But eventually we got people to come back and try our whiskies. And the expression was usually always the same. They'd be reluctantly having a little taste. And then you'd see the change on their face. And they go, oh, this is real whiskey. And they'd make comments like that. And then later on, we would end up with people coming to us and say, look, we walked past you this morning, but we've been told we really should come and try this. And so it sort of went from there. And it took a couple of years of doing that. And after a couple of years, say maybe the third year in, we had people coming straight to us as soon as the doors opened in the morning. They would come up and say, okay, what have you got this year?
That's great.
So we developed a following by being persistent and by putting what we thought at the time was the best that we could put forward. And with the Dutch market, same thing there at the Pot Still Festival. The Dutch are different. Their English skills are very, very good. And they've got a great sense of humour. Right? It's a bit like being in Australia but with an accent. And they were really good. And they're very, very straightforward people. They call a spade, and we got there. They hosted us extremely well. And they'd just come up to us. There was no glass wall around that stand. They would just come up, oh, Australia. Oh, my uncle such and such lives in Australia. What do you got for us? And we tasted and, oh, this is good. And straight away we got that connection with the Dutch. And so we got quite a few sales going in Europe very early on. And then we got on to Canada. And once again, the Europeans and the North Americans, that's America and Canada, are used to drinking single malt whiskey. They love their whiskies. And you walk into a bottle shop in Canada or the US and they've got rows of
single malts.
And the job is to find a way to knock another single malt off that shelf and put yours on it. So it's quite a difficult job, but they are prepared to have a look.
Give you go.
And they trust their palates as well. And so if they liked it, they'll say, yeah, I'll buy that. You didn't have to sell it. They would just do it because they trusted their own palate. Come back to Australia or Asia, it's not the same. We don't tend to trust our own palates. We're inexperienced with whiskey.
So we prefer to rely on a brand or market credibility from awards and things like that rather than our palate.
And also who's selling it in Europe. That was the comment I got when I was in Asia too. Who's buying this in Europe?
Got it.
They wanted to know that, if the Europeans are buying it, it must be okay. So interesting times, and I learned a lot out of that. Eventually, after a few of these awards came in, and in particular winning the world's best single malt in 2014, that's when it really took off. And that's when Australia decided, okay, this is probably okay to drink.
And to give context, if my memory serves me correct, Kavalan won best single malt whiskey in the world the year before Sullivans did?
The year after.
Was it year after, sorry? So then, does that make Sullivans then the first distillery outside of Scotland, Japan or Ireland to win Best Single Malt back then?
That's right.
And obviously the first one in the Southern Hemisphere. So that's a real game changer. And particularly the next year when Kavalan won it, because of their high angel share, the climate there, their whiskies are only 3 or 4 years old. So 2 years in a row, the award goes to not a 400-year-old Scottish distillery, but these new up-and-comers.
Well, the whiskey that won it for us was HH525. And that was, I think at the time, a 12-year-old. And so a nice age. Very good age. And that was a 3 out of a 300-litre.
300-litre, 12-year-old. HH was the acronym for the company at the time.
Holdings.
And 525 was the barrel number.
So that, I think, gave the Australian audience a sense of comfort that this is okay. But prior to that, I mean, if we go back a step, we had got to the point where we were selling all we could anyway. Back in those days, around about 16,000, 17,000 bottles was as much as we could bottle in a year. Based on the number of barrels that we had over
maturing,
a given number of years. So that was just simple numbers to work out. So we tried to stick to that. And some years we sold that and some years we didn't. But the last few years, probably from maybe 2012 on, we were selling
everything out. And what kind of, any idea on proportion of that was outside of Australia?
Prior to that, 90% of what we sold went overseas.
Wow, okay.
And there was a couple of reasons for that. One is the market over there was interested, and we had good distributors who were prepared to do it, invest their time for us. And in those days, look, we said to them, we can't back this with money.
Yep.
We can supply you with the stock, but don't come to us and say, we want $100,000 to market this.
Marketing,
We can't do that.
Yep.
So they supported us very nicely.
Yep.
But 90-odd% of what we sold went overseas.
So that last 10% was a struggle to sell here in Australia. Was it mainly sold in Tasmania, most of it?
No, probably most of it went interstate. I mean, we did have distributors. We did strike agreements with distributors over on the mainland, and we did end up running with Coles and Woolworths. Yep. Even though at the time there was a funny thing going on back in Australia then, a lot of the independent bottle shops were very much against the Dan Murphys of the world. Yes. And we were told that if ever we went over to the dark side, which was effectively
the big chains,
big chains,
they'd never stock you?
That's right, they'd never stock us. And at the time, that's all we were selling to.
Yeah. So you changed you went against that original advice of the wholesale account saying we won't stock you if you're in Dan's eventually?
Well, that's right. And it was a bit of a scary thing because we just weren't selling enough in Australia. We weren't getting out in Australia. Yeah. And I remember saying to a couple of them to very small orders in, I discussed with them the idea that we were going to start running with Coles and Woolies, and they threatened me with all sorts of things. And I just said, well, look, can you supply all my stock for the year? They said, no, of course we can't. I said, well, in that case, if you've got to cut me off, well, you've got to cut me off. Yep. So that'll be the way it is. Signed up with Coles and Woolies, and it was frightening at the time.
Big jump.
It was a huge jump. And I know they came to me and they put an order in that was massive. It was pallets of the stuff. And
to fill the pipeline,
And they had, I don't know what it was, 140, 160 outlets around the country.
This is Dan Murphy's, and they've now got 280, so double that. Yeah. Sorry, what year was that you first went in there?
When was this? This is probably 2010-ish, something
2010,
like that.
So 10 years later, they've got double that store, so about 280, nearly 300,
We sat down with them because I was a little bit nervous about what they might do and how they would treat the brand and all that sort of stuff. And they assured me, look, you're a small brand, we know that. Let's just keep talking and we'll run with it. So we had the double cask, which was our sort of lowest priced whiskey at the time, and we thought, we'll run with that. Let's see how that goes. And they put this order in, was, I forget, 2 cases per store. And, great celebrations, beauty, at last. And they were going to take us right around the country. First, not just a couple of isolated outlets in Melbourne and Sydney. So we thought, that's brilliant. And then I did the sums on what the excise bill was. And it frightened the shit out of me.
It would have been a huge bill,
Well, for us then, we would really just get through.
Because the excise you've got to pay as you ship the whiskey into the distribution centre at Dan Murphy's, but then Dan Murphy's or Woolworths aren't going to pay you for 90 days.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that was a bit scary. And so I worked out what the bill was, and it was more money than I'd dreamed of at the time. Yeah. So I rang the ATO and explained my little tale of woe.
Well, the tax officer say,
Well, I said, look, basically what I was after was a break. I said, look, these guys aren't going to pay me for probably 90 days.
Blue chip as well,
So, it should be right. And they said, no.
Right.
Come back, cut your order down to something you can
manage.
Pay. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's a pretty poor attitude. This could be the make or break of the business. Yeah. So I went to the bank. At that stage, we hadn't borrowed a cent. Yeah. We were doing all this on cash flow. So I went to the bank, or a few banks, and same story. Well, how do we know they're going to pay you? Well, look,
it's Woolworths.
It's a giant company.
It's a $50 billion company.
It'll be right. They've promised they'll pay. They'll pay. Anyway, no, was the sounding answer. And because once again, at this stage, nobody had heard of Australian whiskey really in Australia. So pretty lean pickings. But I ended up doing a deal with a distributor in Sydney. And that was sort of like selling your soul to the devil, because the deal included that all Australian sales had to go through them. And to be fair to them, they took on the burden of that tax bill till we could pay them back. All those sales went through them. So essentially I'd lost 25-30%
margin
of my margin. And that sent us down a road of having to deal with third parties. But that in itself is something you've got to do. You can't kid yourself into thinking you can be your own distributor, I think, in what we were trying to achieve anyway. So
they're very different businesses, distributing whiskey as opposed to making it, let alone marketing it. Definitely agree with that.
Well, with distribution, you've got to have people on the ground who can put it on shelves. And here am I in Hobart. I can't physically fly up to the outlets around the country.
That's right.
And stock them up. It's just not going to happen. But anyway, it got us out there, and I had a panic sort of a thing. Rang up Woolies at the time and said, look, I think we probably do need to cut this back, because what's going to happen is you'll go around all your shops around the country and all these country towns and things. Nobody will ever heard of it. It'll sit on your shelves, nobody will buy it.
Yeah.
And then you'll discount it out and there's the end of the business. That's what was running through
Yeah.
my mind. And they just said, look, just relax,
Yep.
just chill, you'll be right.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
it'll be okay.
They're very good, the Dan's guys. They're very supportive. The market intelligence they share with you, and yeah, it's amazing.
So anyway, no, they said, look, look, this is the way we've got to do it. So let's just run with it. So I was quietly shitting myself as the truck disappeared off with pallets of whiskey, thinking, oh, well, I've just sent the business on the good. But then a few weeks later, and it was literally only a few weeks later,
They put another order in?
They put another order in.
The same size?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
and
amazing.
I couldn't believe it. But it took us about 3 months to actually bottle that because we had a little single head bottle filler.
But you guys are still, you don't use a bottling machine out of Sullivans. They're still manually bottling with a four-head?
Manually bottling. Yeah, we've got 4 heads.
You've upgraded from a single to a 4-head, a manual bottling machine, yeah.
So, but back in those days, we did it by hand, and I was on the bottling line just the same.
Jeez, yeah.
And so it took us, I think it was 3 months.
Yeah.
So it took us a long time to get the order together to get it over there. And then 3 weeks later, we get another order in the same size. So I rang them up and said, oh,
is there an...
Are you sure this
is not a glitch?
Isn't on repeat or something on the computer?
Yeah.
And they said, no, we want another order. And I said, oh, is it selling?
Great.
And they said, yeah, they'd got rid of quite a bit of it already from around the country.
And out of interest, what was the price point then on the shelf? $150?
For double cask, no, that would have been maybe $110, something like that.
Yep, but that's still expensive in the mind of a whiskey consumer, is being trained to know that you can get a good quality scotch for around $60. Yes. So that's a pretty big leap to go from a consumer from $60 to $110. That's phenomenal.
Look, it is. And the double cask came about because I wanted something that was nice and soft and easy and approachable to the Australian potential market because we didn't have the market.
Yep.
And so that's why I put that one together, because it was a really nice, easy whiskey to drink.
Yep.
And I still think it's a bloody good whiskey.
It is.
But I diluted that one down to 40% to keep the excise as low as I possibly could. I was trying to keep that particular line under $100 for as long as I possibly could. But excise eventually beat me there. And once it ticks over $100...
Yeah, you're in a whole different category.
It's a real price barrier there.
It is.
So I was a bit nervous about ticking over that $100 bracket.
So would you say that move then of going to Dan's, biting the bullet, taking that huge risk, not just from a cash flow point of view, but, potentially pissing off the other distribution channel, which is your trade accounts, would you say that really, because this is 3 years before you won the big award, which put Sullivans and Tasmanian and Australian whiskey on the map. So would you say that Dan's move was a real game changer for the business?
Absolutely. It was the best thing we ever did.
Yeah.
And I had distilleries at the time telling me I was mad.
Yeah. And I'm sure Bill Lark was one of those.
Well, I didn't want to name names. But
no, you're even now because you told him not to get into whiskey and he told you not to get into Dan's.
Yeah. At the time, we convinced ourselves that was the mad thing to do.
Yeah.
But I was sort of getting to the point where I thought, look, if we're ever going to get into this market, we've got to do something beyond what we're doing now. But as it happened, I guess we did lose a couple of accounts from the independents at the time, but only for a short time. And it wasn't long before they were coming back.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, we'd changed from 90% of what we're selling overseas, 10% Australia, to 90% of what we're selling suddenly became Australia, and 10%, or it might have been 85, 15%, something like that.
So this is because of the Dan's change, not because of the award, but before that. So
this is all before.
Yeah. So
we got up to selling all we could, and the going with the big change was crucial to that. But the smaller independents did come back. Yeah. But all of a sudden, we were now bottling every day. It was a real game changer, the whole thing. After probably could have been 18 months, we decided that we'd release the other two lines. And in those days, it was the American oak, which is the black label, and the French oak, which is the blue label. So we decided to release them as well to Dan Murphy's and so on. Yeah. So the same thing happened there. They put in these huge orders. We were a bit more used to it by then, and I had a crew on that were bottling around, well, not around the clock, but daily. Yep. So we could do it much faster, still with the same single head bottling machine.
Cannot believe that, but
hand labelling and all that.
Yep.
So things changed, and in particular, once we won the Best Whiskey Award, all of a sudden everybody wanted it.
Yeah, so we spoke about this a few years ago because I was really intrigued what happened after the award, the change in your channel mix, because you guys really pulled everything back, I guess, to retail. So it was about a year after you opened a really nice cellar door tasting room out at the distillery, and you had a big online push, I guess, to take advantage of the incredible brand you got from winning the award. And travelling around the world, and even on the mainland in Dan Murphy's as well, clearly there's not that much stock to go around.
No. There's not.
Because everyone was after it. They knew where to go. They had to go to the distillery pretty much to get it. So there's a big change in that channel mix.
Yeah, there was, but I can't remember what the mix was at the time. But only a certain percentage of it we did at retail ourselves.
Yep.
The majority of it still went at distributor price.
Right.
Distributors either globally or in Australia.
Yep.
So back then we could have very easily done everything retail.
Yep.
And the temptation was there to do that because you're getting full margin for your product.
Also, you could charge a phenomenal premium because the best whiskey in the world Whiskey Awards in that category, 30 years have been going? 20 or 30 years?
The awards themselves?
Yeah.
No, not that long. It was only a few years before that they started. But my view was that even though we could do that, if for whatever reason it didn't hold up, we would then become the Dan Murphys. We would become 90% of that business.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I thought we've got to have the brand in restaurants, in bars, in bottle shops. Felt that was important.
Great. So just timeline-wise then, so getting us up to speed now, it's 2020, mid-2020. You stepped down as leading the business December last year, 7 months ago. But in between winning the big award and pretty much you leaving the business operationally, there were new owners that came into the business.
Yes.
Was it 2016?
Yes.
So that's pretty much the timeline. Yeah. Any other key numbers you can talk about to show the growth? Staff, maybe when you finished in December, FTE?
When I left, it would have been 22, 23 people. Right. So when we sold the business 3.5 years ago now, we had 12 people. And so now there's about, I think there's about 22, 23.
Great. And what about context of whiskey under in casks over the years?
That's grown a lot.
Yeah.
So we're producing the same amount every year.
Yep.
But that has grown. I mean, we're up to 5 warehouses now.
Wow.
Which sounds a lot, I guess, in the Australian context, but in the
it's a drop in the ocean.
Yeah. And currently looking for another warehouse.
Yeah. Great.
The new ownership, they're doing the right thing. They're putting more down. They've got a really good crew.
Yeah.
They've got really dedicated young people that are there because they appreciate the brand and they're very invested in producing really good spirit.
Yeah. So when was the moment you felt that you'd succeeded?
It took a couple of years more than winning the big award. That was a great accolade. I mean, prior to that, we'd won, over a few years, we'd won Best Australian, Single Malt and these sorts of things in the same awards and other awards around the world. That was gratifying, and it told me that what we were producing was good consistently. It wasn't just one bottle or one barrel. It was over a number of years, a variety of barrels were pulling very big awards. So I thought we are doing something right. But once we got to the point, which I guess was probably 2016 or so, it became a bit easy in a way. Everything was set up. We had a good crew going. The fight had gone out of it for me. And what I like to do is I like to be in the planning stages of business. I like to be there at the start, come up with the idea and come up with the model or the plan to go forward. And when I felt I'd achieved that, like I'd got a business that had been liquidated. And got it to one of the top brands in Australia and possibly in the world.
Absolutely.
And I could have stayed there, or our partnership could have stayed there. But I thought time's come to move on and hand this on to the next person. Who might want to invest a lot more money and do a lot more things.
Yeah, so we'll talk funding. You mentioned before, you've got some government grants to help with the marketing and the expansion of the sales. Investors obviously along the way, but you didn't have any bank finance at all?
Not for the distillery business. We did buy the warehouses that we're in. We set up another company for that to own the actual warehouses. We borrowed money to buy the warehouses. But the distillery business itself had to be self-funding, or we wanted it to be self-funding.
Got it.
And we didn't open up to bring in new investors or anything. We stayed with the same three all the way through.
Great. Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so the audience can learn from it? Can you pick one moment? Was it waving goodbye to the pallets off to Dan Murphy's, or was it something else?
No, probably a bit before that. My frustration with the Australian market, I guess, prior to that, we'd done a hell of a lot of work trying to understand the market and get into the markets. And I remember walking into the warehouse that we had at the time, looking at all these barrels and thinking, what the fuck have we done? We had 1,000 odd barrels sitting there and nobody wanted to buy it. And I thought, what have we done? And I was trying to work out, how do I ring the ATO and say, well, here's the keys.
We're not paying your excise. Jeez.
But that was probably 2008, 9, something like that.
Yeah. And what area in business do you feel you had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I think it's always people.
Yeah.
People, whether it's the people you employ or the people you partnership with as far as distribution goes and things like that. It's anything like making a whiskey is all about people.
Yep.
The people you employ is really crucial.
Yes.
And to set up a dynamic within the group of people that you employ is important.
Yeah.
And when you've got a small group of people, that's not that difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just simple things like heading down to the pub on a Friday night and shouting all the drink.
Yep.
And that just relaxes them. And
it softens the edges, doesn't it? Yeah.
So people, I'd say, would be the answer to that.
What have you enjoyed least about managing that fast growth?
You get further away from the people. I ended up stuck in front of the computer, handling, I'm doing the pays, I'm sorting out any problems that there might be. I'm not actually hands-on with the still anymore. I'm not filling barrels, That's what I like to do. But, further and further away from the people that actually work in the business.
Yeah. What's been the biggest mindset shift in your small business growth journey? What have you really changed your thinking on over the years?
That would be the difference in the way you operate after your brand becomes successful. And we went from trying to push our brand onto people to actually trying to hold it back. So that was a different dynamic, a different way to think. We had to educate ourselves about how we go forward from there. Because as I said before, once the fight goes out of something, you kind of lose interest.
Yes.
And when the fight's there, you're always looking to win that fight.
Yeah. And what's the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
I think they need to have a business plan right from the start. They need to stick to that plan and refer to it as you go along. Because if you stray from that, things can come undone.
Be the change you want to see in your business. Become more productive and less stressed with our free Transform Your Performance online course. Once you see the benefits, put your entire team through the course at no cost. We start out by telling you the secret to guaranteed success, then over 100 lessons help you be more focused, present, productive, and feel more in control about work. growasmallbusiness.com.
Can you talk about how you've added people to the team over the years, some wins, mistakes, and any advice for those listening?
That is interesting and can be difficult. Because you're not dealing with a number, you're dealing with a real person. And when you're a small business, you generally know everybody in that business personally. And so in the early days, I would put probably relatives on, which is a double-edged sword.
Yes, it is.
You know your cousins and your brothers or your sisters, and you put them on if you think they can do the job that you want them to do, and they're usually very good at it, and you can trust them. And I knew they would think for themselves, dynamic thinkers, they knew what they had to do. And I knew I could leave the business for long periods of time, and it'd be in safe hands. Yeah. So I had no problem with any of that. But as the business grows, some of them are very good in the positions that they were in before, but even though you think, they'd be good in this new position that's been created, they may not be.
Yes, yeah.
Or they might be uncomfortable with that position and not willing to say no or something like that. So you've got to be very sensitive to that. But when it gets to the point where they don't want to be there anymore, they want to go back to what they were doing before, it can become tricky. Yeah.
Definitely.
But even for people that you don't know before you put them on, it's always a gamble. You don't know who you're going to get. Yeah. You can do your best to try and pick who you think will be the best, but the time comes where there needs to be a parting of the ways. I always find that difficult.
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest things in running a business, definitely.
Well, you are actually dealing with real people, with emotions and feelings.
And lives. Sort of stuff. They've got support,
But the other side of it too is, as an employer, you can't talk about your employees with other employees. No. And if they're having certain problems within their lives, they quite often talk to me about those problems. I mean, half the time I found myself being a counsellor for their problems at home or whatever. So you end up with this thing going on where I'm trying to help that person, and the last thing they need is to be fired.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
You need to do that.
Yeah. What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture and to help with the growth? So you mentioned before, like going to the pub is good. Is there anything else from culture-wise?
I think it helps if people can talk to you. Like if you're not seen as that person sitting up in an ivory tower. And I know it's very hard for people to come into a business and you're the boss and there's this certain thing that goes on. Yeah. And it's very hard for people to come up to the boss and say, oh, look.
That's a fucking stupid idea.
And sometimes it needs to be said.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's more a reflection on you, though. Often, if you've got your ego in check and you've the culture's there that people can approach you and say, I think that's a bad idea.
Yeah, well, it might not be that, but what I tried to do was, for as long as I could, I did actually try and do a stint on the still. I did actually bottle and label and do things like that and pack boxes just to spend time with the crew. And nearly every day I try and sit down and have a cup of coffee with them all.
Yep.
And I felt the Friday night drinks was important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people drop their guards a bit with a couple of drinks in, and they're more likely to start to discuss things that are concerning them or things that they would like to put forward that they feel could be good for the business.
Yeah. So we'll talk about board of directors. Your experience, especially in the last 10 years, I guess.
Yeah, well, it was the same 3 directors.
Yep.
I was one of them, so it's important, once again, to keep that communication going.
Yep.
So my directors lived in other countries most of the time.
Mm-hmm. America and UK, was it? One
America
each?
And Spain.
Yeah.
So I'd be on the phone at all sorts of strange hours of the night and day. But it's important that they feel comfortable about where we're going and that they feel that they've got a say in the direction of the business. Mm-hmm. And so when the end of the financial year comes around and the accountant dutifully produces the paperwork for the year, you can sit there and discuss it with them. And if they've got any concerns, now's the time.
Yep.
So it was, for a number of years, it was a static board situation.
Yeah, right.
And they were very good for the business.
Great. All right, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
I guess that would be keeping an eye on cash flow.
Yeah.
You can't spend beyond your means.
Yes.
Stick to your business plan, but cash is king.
Absolutely. Favourite business book which helped you the most?
Well, I don't really have one of them.
Yep.
I went back to college when I was about 30.
Yep.
Did a business course, got qualifications, but not to become an accountant. I just wanted to know what accountants were telling me.
Yep. Good.
So,
what about any great podcasts or online learning tools you used?
No, I haven't really got into that either.
What about one tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
Have a good accountant.
Have a good accountant. A few people have said that. That is a great answer. Yep. And final, my favourite question, what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Back yourself. Have a plan. Stick to the plan. You'll go through times when you'll hate yourself for doing what you're doing, but if you stick to your plan and it all works out, you'll appreciate what you've done. Yeah,
good advice. Thanks, Patrick, for your time today. I think the audience get a shit ton of value out of everything you've shared with us today, and really appreciate you sitting down and speaking with me in this very noisy brewing setting, but with trucks going past and helicopters, but I think we've managed to get through it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey. We'll have all the show notes and any resources mentioned in the cast on our website. One of the first craft distilleries of commercial scale in Australia, founded in 1996, sold in 1999, went into liquidation in 2003, then Patrick and a few investors salvaged the business. Closing the cellar door in Central Hobart and moving the distillery 20 minutes out of town into an industrial park, they invested heavily in production with a big focus on laying down quality spirit and then marketing. In 2014, won Best Single Malt Whiskey in the world, the first distillery to do so outside whisky's traditional homes of Scotland, Ireland and Japan. A year later, they opened a cellar door, and a year after that, the business was sold again to the current owners, and Patrick left the business in late 2019. Grew from a handful of FTE to 9, down to just 2 after liquidation, and now 23. He believes the hardest thing in growing a small business is keeping an eye on cash flow. Cash is king. Advice Patrick would give himself on day one is back yourself, have a plan, stick to the plan. You'll go through times where you hate yourself for doing what you're doing, but it'll all work out.